Good morning, all. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it. My name is Kim Wasserman. I'm the Executive Director of the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization on the southwest side of Chicago. We are a 23-year organization that's been doing work on environmental justice on the southwest side. I apologize, I'm a little lethargic. I literally got off the plane at like 1 o'clock this morning and made my way over here, but I appreciate the opportunity. Our work in Chicago is really, was not something that we've been looking for. So I should start out by saying I am a product of Chicago Public Schools. I'm a product of the Chicago Public Library, the Chicago Transit Authority. I am a product of the common goods in Chicago. And as a young person growing up on the southwest side of Chicago, our community is very much a frontline community. We are a community of low-income community color. We are the youngest community in the city of Chicago. Half of our population is under the age of 25. And we are also one of the most largely densely populated communities in Chicago. We house anywhere between 104,000 people to 95,000 people in an area that's 5 miles in radius. So we have a very highly condensed community with not a lot of open space. We're a formerly industrialized community with now a lot of industrial legacy all the way around it. But more importantly, we're an amazing Mexican-American community. We are the second largest Mexican-American community outside of East Los Angeles. So just to let folks know, in the Midwest, we are the capital of Mexican-Americans in the Midwest. We're pretty proud of that. So as a community, we started down the road of environmental justice purely by accident. It was our community members who saw a local school's windows being replaced and roof being retarred without any consideration for the health of the children in the school. So they retarred the roof when the kids were in summer school. And if you know anything about Chicago Public Schools, not all of them have air conditioning. In fact, most of them have to open their windows in the summertime and put fans in the windows. So the teachers were sucking in fresh smell of tar while the students were in school. And so students started to pass out. Students started to have asthma attacks. At the same time, they replaced the windows in the school without any consideration for lead and asbestos. This is a building that's over 100 years old. And so they exposed all the kids in the school to lead and asbestos without any cleanup. The janitors would simply come in and clean up with pine salt, not knowing that they were dealing with lead and asbestos. And so community members were like, wait a minute, as contractors, as day laborers, we know that this is not right. We know that there's environmental protocols that these contractors are supposed to be following. Why is it that they are not following them? And really what it came down to was environmental racism. These folks did not feel that our students and our community deserved proper remediation, proper construction in their community. And so our family members started to fight back. And that was in 1998, and we're really happy to say that we've been around since then. So in the last 20 years, we've had some major victories on the southwest side of Chicago. It started with that one school, but it grew into understanding that in our community of about 95,000 people, a lot of our folks in our neighborhood have asthma. And we really couldn't understand why it was that in our neighborhood, where Mexican-Americans actually have a pretty low asthma rate, and Puerto Ricans have a very high asthma rate, in our neighborhood, that statistic did not stand true. In our neighborhood, we were nearly triple the national average for asthma, and we could not understand why. And so we walked around our neighborhood one day, and lo and behold, we found ourselves a coal power plant in our neighborhood. And most people are like, how do you find a coal power plant? Like, it's been there the whole time, has it not? Well, yeah, it has been. But most people in our neighborhood had no idea what they made there, had no idea what this plant was for. The smoke that came out of the smokestacks was white and silver, and people did not associate pollution with that. A lot of our young people called the coal factory the cloud factory, because that's where they thought that the clouds came from, right? They just come out of the smokestack, and that's where the clouds come from. It doesn't say a lot about the science teachers as well. I'm just kidding. And so, as a neighborhood, we started to ask and find out, like, well, how is this coal power plant impacting us? And it turned out that this coal power plant was one of two in Chicago, one in Pilsen and one in Little Village. They were literally less than 5 miles away from each other. Two of the oldest, nastiest coal power plants in the nation, and the last 2 coal power plants in a metropolitan area. The reality is these coal power plants had been around 60 plus years and 70 plus years in Pilsen, but they employed nobody from our neighborhood. And in Pilsen, they only employed about 5 people. The electricity that they generated wasn't even sold in the Chicago or Illinois area. It was sold out to the open market in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, was the purchaser of that electricity. And so as a community, we were like, how is it that we have this huge coal power plant, no jobs, no economic benefit, but yet 40 people in our neighborhood are dying prematurely every year because of that. We have over 3,000 asthma attacks in our neighborhood because of that. And so we really wanted to understand how do we deal with this? How do we fight this? And so what ensued was a 12-year fight to shut down the coal power plants in Chicago. And in 2012, we were successful. The two coal power plants. But please know that we really struggled and we really tried to work with the coal power plant to figure out how do we not just unemploy 300 people, how do we just not unemploy 180 people at the respective plants? And we really struggled for 12 years to figure out how to build with the unions at the coal power plant to do a just transition. How do we transition these workers from an unjust system to a just system? Unfortunately, in that case, it did not work out. A third of the coal power plant workers retired, a third moved to another plant, and a third were bought out. And we still struggle to this day to figure out how we could have done that better. But I think for the work that we did, being a young organization, I'm still pretty proud of the fact that we still shut them down. And today we are still working on the redevelopment of that land. One of the things that's very important for us is for our communities and our people to have self-determination. We don't need somebody else to tell us what's right for our community. And so the city right now is on a mission to try to put what they call a green casino on the property. They feel that instead of killing us with pollution, now giving us addiction to gambling is the better way to go. But they believe that the way they can buy us off with this is by making it a green, eco-friendly casino. So we are very much fighting them on any type of casino, I don't care if it's green, purple, blue, or red. We don't want it in our neighborhood. And really what we're fighting for is how do we bring justice to a site that stood for injustice for so long in our neighborhood. The second campaign that we worked on for over 20 years was an open space campaign. We literally have 95,000 people, half of them are under the age of 25, yet we only have one park we had only one park in our neighborhood. As one of the more violent communities in Chicago, we recognize a direct correlation between jobs, activities, and youth services and youth violence. There is a direct correlation with the fact that our youth are unemployed and have nothing to do in the neighborhood and the services that they lack. And so for 20 years, we fought the Chicago Park District to get them to build us a park in our neighborhood. They had not built a park in our neighborhood in over 75 years. That right there is environmental racism. When you don't put the services and the programs in one of the most highly dense communities in the city of Chicago for over 75 years and wonder why we have an obesity problem and wonder why we have a diabetes problem and you wonder why we cost so much on the Medicaid system, it's because we don't have access to the resources that we need to live a healthy lifestyle. Our air is polluted, we have no open space, right? And so for 20 years we fought to get a park in our neighborhood. And because we are a former industrial community, we don't have like virgin farmland that you can just build on and say, let's build a pretty park, right? We had to find former industrial land and figure out how to convert it into a park. So not only did we get a park on a former industrial land, we got a park on a former Superfund site. And I don't know how many of you are familiar. It's not super fun, it's super fund, because it takes a super fund of money to clean it up. And in fact, the Celotex site in our community was the highest ranking Superfund site in the nation. It actually beat out Love Canal for the level of pollution that it had on site. And so this is where the Park District decided would be the appropriate place to build our community park. And we actually couldn't fight them on it because the reality is this site had been causing toxic legacy issues in our community for over 20 years. Every time it rained, this site would leach out contaminated water into people's basements, and in fact 177 homes right around the site for over 20 years would get flooded with water that was filled with polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which is a carcinogen, and they had no idea. And so every time they go into their basement to open up Chicago's very unique, we have basements, and when we flood, you have to go in the basement and open up the little sewer top holes. I see the Chicago residents know what I'm talking about. And you open it and then the water just goes right back down, and then you just have to mop and clean up. People were doing that with no shoes on. They were rolling up their pants and putting exposed skin into that water for over 20 years, not knowing that 20 minutes after they got out of the water, the rashes that they were getting on their skin were directly correlated to the pHs that were in the water. So while the city was trying to sell us on a park, We were fighting to get these homes cleaned up. We were fighting to get this site cleaned up because we didn't want to talk about a park until you could assure us that our community was going to be safe just dealing with this site. And so finally in 2014, we were successful in not only getting 177 homes in the area remediated, we found the responsible party, in this case was Honeywell International Corporation, who makes thermostats, fans. I'm sure everybody here has something in their home that the Honeywell Corporation makes. They were the responsible party. They then had to come out, clean up all the homes, and they had capped the site, and then from there they were able to build a brand new 23-acre park in our neighborhood. We have the largest playground now in the city of Chicago. It's a 22-acre park. And actually one of the amazing things that we learned when the park opened is that within a quarter mile of our park, there are over 5,000 children under the age of 5. We're very good Catholics, we procreate. Very well. But now one of the other interesting things about our park is literally right across the street from our park is Cook County Jail. It's the largest metropolitan jail in the world, is in our backyard. And so as a young person growing up, the view that I got of the world was a coal power plant polluting my neighborhood and 96 acres dedicated to the incarceration of our people. Yet in our neighborhood, we only had 11 acres dedicated to open space up until that point. With the bringing on of the new park, we now have 54 acres of open space dedicated in our community, but we still have 96 acres dedicated to the incarceration of our young people. And so for us, this really speaks to the pipeline that is created for low-income communities of color from schools directly to jails. And so when people ask us, why would you build a park across the street from the jail? It's because that's the reality that we don't have the privilege to say, let's put the park someplace else. This is the reality that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so we want our families to understand that we recognize, right, the opposition of having a jail and having a park, but we don't shy away from hard conversations. We employ our young people to do patrolling in our park. We actually make it a point to not work with the Chicago Police Department because they don't recognize how to work with our young people. And so we actually work with parents, young people who have formerly been incarcerated or in the system. We pay them a stipend, and every day from 4 to 6 o'clock, they're at the park using restorative justice and other methods to help de-escalate situations. And I'm proud to say for the last 2 years, we're one of the only parks in the city of Chicago that has not had a shooting or any type of violent incident happen in its park. And that's because we truly believe the community has ownership. We don't need Chicago Police Department rolling through our community, pulling our young people over, harassing them. We can police ourselves, and we can do it in a manner that doesn't break up families, that doesn't deport families, right? That doesn't jail our young people. We can do it in a manner that builds community versus breaking up community. So the last thing I'll talk about is we also worked on a campaign for public transit. As a neighborhood in the city of Chicago, you would think to yourself, you have great transit in Chicago. In our neighborhood, if you wanted to go from Little Village to the lakefront, where we are right now, it would take you 2 hours on public transit. I literally flew from LaGuardia to Chicago in under 2 hours last night. There's no reason why it should take anybody in the city of Chicago 2 hours to get anywhere. And so we started to want to understand why was it that we did not have good public transit service. And in fact, we had a 3-mile gap in our neighborhood with no east to west bus service, which meant if you were an elder, if you were a mom, if you were somebody who had any type of disability, you had to walk either 3 miles in one direction or 1.5 miles if you lived in to get where you needed to go. And so we really wanted to understand how is it that this happens and what can we do about it. So our young people started to survey the street and find out how many businesses, well, let me back up. Our young people went to Chicago Transit Authority and said, look, we have a new high school that we had to go on a hunger strike for, mind you, but we got a new high school. Twice we had to go on a hunger strike, but we got it. Got a new high school. We're the only high school in the city of Chicago without bus service within a 2-block radius. Being one of the most segregated cities of Chicago, a lot of our African-American young people get chased to school every day and get chased home every day. What are we doing about this as a city? How are we protecting our young people? Chicago Transit Authority gave 2 buds about that situation. It's the 31st Street bus. We're on the southwest side. I can show you on the map in a minute. Yeah. And so for 2 years, we tried tugging on their heartstrings. We brought out young people. Our young people went and mapped out every school, did a map and showed how a bus line was missing for our community. They did not care. So finally, when they finally hit a roadblock, we said, all right, well, you gotta start thinking like CTA then. And so that's when they started doing their homework. Who's on the board? Who makes the decisions, right? They understood that the Chicago Transit Authority board is actually all business people, right? Their perspective is, what's the bottom line? How much money am I going to make? And they started to understand that in Chicago, what we're starting to see is instead of having a public good conversation about our commons, we're having a monetary conversation about how much money can these institutions make. And they started to realize that the narrative was changing, that we were no longer learning civics as young people, so we no longer understood that our education and our transit and our libraries are actually free for a reason, and they should be free for, they're not here to make money, they're here to provide a service, right? And so when they started to understand that, they said, well, let's put on that business perspective if that's what it takes. So they went out and for a year and a half, surveyed every business on the street to find out what time do you open, what time do you close, how many employees do you have, how many customers do you have, do you have the zip codes that they come from? Can we find out if perhaps they would take the bus? They then started to do the math and figure out estimates of populations of people that would take the bus. They looked at interconnectivity and started to see how many other bus lines does this connect to? How much revenue could this make for CTA? They created a 7-page report, asked for a meeting with CTA. We had the head planner come out. He read our report and he said, this is probably one of the best bus proposals I've ever seen in my life. And I looked at our young people. I get, thank you. So our bus service has been in place for 5 years now. And and you can now get to the lakefront in under 35 minutes. I am happy to know that. So all these amazing things, all this amazing work, we're intergenerational, we work at old, young, it doesn't matter who you are, we will work with you. But we win all these wins in 2014, and then all of a sudden, the city of Chicago, the same city who told us when we went to them, said shut down this coal power plant, and they said if you don't like living next to a coal power plant, move, is what they told us. When we shut them down, got the park, got the bus, all of a sudden the city's like, hey, that's quite a little attractive neighborhood you got going on there. You got a new park, you got good bus service, right? You got clean air.
Let's raise taxes.
Say that one more time for me.
Let's raise taxes.
That's exactly right. Right now, the city of Chicago is on a mission to move out the 60% of renters who live in our neighborhood, to replace them with homeowners. Because who are they going to get a bigger tax return on? The homeowners. And so as an organization, we had no clue or concept that when we fought for clean air, when we fought for more open space and public transit, that we would be giving the guidebook to the city of Chicago to displace us and to gentrify our community.
I missed something here. What, could you tell me what
Can you wait just a second? Do you want to do questions now, or do you want to finish up?
I can finish up and then I can take your question if you'd like. I'm sorry.
I'm confused. What is the purpose of this meeting again?
Oh, I'm
Environmental justice.
sorry. Environmental justice.
Climate.
Okay.
Nick, were you not here when I made the introduction, maybe?
No, he was calling everybody to attention.
All right.
Yeah.
We've got 3 components. We're going to do environmental justice.
That's okay. I understand. I get it now.
So the work that we did around more open space, public transit, and clean air for us are directly correlated to environmentalism, right? Folks want to talk about reducing their carbon footprint. Folks want to talk about taking X amount of tons of CO2 from the environment. When we talk about that in our community, people are like, what footprint? A ton of what? Because we recognize that as a community, it's not on our terms. Every community is different, and every community is fighting for something different. But in our case, we recognize because of our culture, because of our history, that not having access to public transit wasn't fair to our community. Not having access to open space wasn't fair to our community, right? And these are things that affect our indoor environment, our outdoor environment. They affect the places where we work, where we play, where we pray. And so as a community, we should have the right to determine what happens in our neighborhood, right? Just like folks on native land should have the right to determine what happens on their land, right? It doesn't matter if you agree with the coal power plant or not. It doesn't matter if you agree with the pipeline or not. What this comes down to is, do communities have the right to self-determination? Are we empowered to make decisions for ourselves? And so as an organizer in the last 5 years, I've actually had to take off an organizing hat and put on a planning hat. Because I realized that somebody somewhere made a decision to allow a coal power plant in my community. Somebody somewhere made a decision to not build open space in my neighborhood for 75 years. Somebody made a decision that we didn't need public transit. And so we wanted to understand, how do we become proactive? How do we stop reacting? And how do we start getting on the front end of these conversations? And so we have literally strategically inserted ourselves in all kinds of conversations on the cities, at the city level, to try to disrupt the system that is, and introduce a system where we as a community can make our own choices. And so, for instance, the city right now, as I mentioned, has done not one, not two, but 3 land use plans since 2014 in our neighborhood. If you look at Katrina, New Orleans, those communities went through almost 6 to 8 land use plans after Katrina happened, right? It's called, what Naomi Klein calls, shock, exactly, shock doctrine, exactly, right? It not only can happen with tragedy, it can also happen with victory. And so what we're seeing is environmental gentrification. Here we are as low-income communities of color trying to fight to clean up our neighborhood, and then we're being pushed out of the same neighborhoods that we fought for. And where are they pushing us into? The suburbs, right? Where are they pushing us out of the city? Right, and so now folks are having to go to Joliet or Aurora in communities that don't have good public transit, that weren't designed environmentally speaking, that were designed with that suburban sprawl. Malls are shutting down left and right in this country, right? But that's where they expect low-income communities to go. And so right now, we are now not just fighting for environmental justice, we're fighting for economic justice too. What we say is, we might be one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, but the fact is, we're second to Michigan Avenue in tax revenue, yet we have no big box stores in our neighborhood. Right? We have economic power in our community, and we need to figure out how to leverage that and push back to make the decisions that we want to make. So the last thing I will say is that we recognize the direct interconnection, not just with environmental justice, but immigrant rights, economic justice, just everything across the sun. And so we always invite folks who want to come out and support us and want to come out and help. Right now, the work that we're doing is to fight the city on displacing our community. We're trying to protect the renters in our neighborhood. They're trying to introduce a new paseo, like the 606, on the north side. It's like the Highland Trail in New York. They want to put one in our neighborhood. And the reality is, right now, one of the biggest fights that we have in our neighborhood is against Unilever. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Unilever Corporation. If you look in your bathroom and you have Dove soap, if you look in your kitchen and you have Hellmann's mayonnaise, you have Unilever product in your home. In our neighborhood for the last 100 years, Hellmann's mayonnaise has been made. So if you have Hellmann's, I'm a Miracle Whip kind of gal, if you have Hellmann's in your home, you probably got it from my neighborhood. And so Hellmann's, Unilever has been in our neighborhood for over 100 years making mayo. And they're in the industrial corridor, they're behind people's homes, you don't really see them. But they have, 2 years ago, decided to expand. Cholesterol apparently is going down, mayo usage apparently is going up. And so they need more warehouses and more trucks for their mayo. And so they put in an application, they got approved, but nobody bothered to stop and think for 1 second about the elementary school that's 10 feet away from their parking lot. And so they've approved for Unilever to bring in 500 to 900 more trucks, diesel trucks a day. And there are 800 elementary school students that will be sitting 10 feet away from the back of those diesel trucks. And so when we talk about planning, this is what we're talking about. Somewhere somebody in the city is making a decision to approve these industrial uses and not taking into consideration the impact that they have on our community. And so right now we are fighting tooth and nail to get the city to understand environmental health and environmental health outcomes as part of their planning process. Because it's not just us, it's the pet coke and manganese piles on the southeast side. It's the metal shredders in Pilsen. It's the metal shredders up on the west side. Every neighborhood in Chicago in some capacity is being impacted by the industrial corridor. We want jobs. They are our saving grace. We need industrial jobs, but they don't have to kill us in the process. And so we invite folks to join us for what we call a just transition conversation. How do we transition from dirty industry to clean energy that can provide jobs, but protect our health and environment at the same time? So